Well, what a season. As I speak right now, we are in Sydney at the end of a significant lockdown, and over the next couple of weeks, we will be able to connect with loved ones, reconnect as a church family, and just be a little more free than we have been over the past few months. Well, that's the plan anyway. If I'm completely honest, I have some anxious thoughts around all this, creating new habits, a little overwhelmed at the life I live, getting busier, and not knowing how the new way of doing things will look yet again. I'm sure many are re-evaluating how church life will look moving forward, asking questions like, why do we do what we do? Why do we even need to gather together as a church? And do I now want to give up my easy Sunday mornings and serve in my church and community? Because it is easier to choose the easier life and let others do it. I know for me, I have missed connecting face to face with my church family and being cheered on, although I don't mean literally, although preaching and being cheered on would be kind of cool. And I have also enjoyed a season of relaxed Sundays. But then recently I was drawn to a verse in Hebrews that reminded me the importance of coming together, where it says we should not give up on meeting together and encouraging each other. In this season, not having in-person church gathering, I have needed to be more disciplined and intentional about my own faith journey, spending more time with God and making sure I connect with my life group girls online, calling people, virtual check-ins with my church family, and even some virtual praying together. Although it's been great to have the technology to do this, I have missed the encouragement of gathering as a church and worshipping together, and I've also had way too much time to think and focus on all the things in my head, which is in some ways a gift, and in other ways it's way too much thinking about what I think about. This is week 24 of the story, and we are focusing on Jesus and his teaching. And I love the way he taught. Sometimes Jesus taught in parables, which were stories that are drawn from everyday life to help us understand. Often, Jesus would use examples that a farmer would understand, because a lot of the people in that day were farmers, and it was a world that they understood. Like the story of the farmer scattering the seed. Then Jesus also had a more direct style of teaching, where he would directly teach people, like the time he taught people how to pray and explained this through what we know as the Lord's Prayer. Jesus also taught through experiences, using people's experiences to teach us how to live. And one example of this was when Peter walked on water. The story goes that one day Jesus' disciples went out ahead of him and got in the boat on the Sea of Galilee to cross over to the other side. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, when it was still dark, but light was just starting to peek over the horizon. Jesus decided to then catch up with them. He didn't use a boat, he just walked out to them on the water. Then, when the disciples thought they were seeing a ghost, Jesus was quick to say, "Don't be afraid, it's me, Jesus." Then Peter said, "If it's really you, then call me to come to you on the water." So Jesus says, "Sure, come out." And that's when Peter stepped out of the boat. Peter was doing great until he took his eyes off Jesus and placed them on the waves and the wind. Started looking around and lost his focus, and then began to sink. Peter then cried out, "Save me!" And then Jesus reached out and saved him. You may have heard this story before, but when I read it again this week, I closed my eyes and just pictured, not the storybook version, but what I imagined was happening. I imagined that as Peter got out of that boat, that his friends in the boat were encouraging him and cheering him on. "Come on, Peter, you've got this." All while he kept his eyes fixed on Jesus. It gives me goosebumps to think of how in our church, I am blessed to be part of a community where people cheer me on, and this encourages me to keep my eyes fixed on him and take one step at a time. I'm sure back in the boat And as the disciples did life together, just like in a church family, that they would probably not always agree with each other. Sometimes they would rub each other the wrong way because they did life so closely and not always getting it right. But they still encouraged each other, cheered and supported each other, no matter what life was throwing them. Then, as the story goes, when Peter took his focus off Jesus and started to focus on himself and all that was happening around him, that's when he started to sink. And man, that is just like me sometimes. When I start to focus on myself, all that's happening around me, my wind, my storm, then I so often lose my way when I get preoccupied with my stuff. But like in this story, if you want to walk on water, you need to keep walking towards Jesus. Keep your eyes fixed on him and don't become preoccupied with life's storms. This is something I have to remind myself daily. When I can shift my focus off myself and all my desires and fix my eyes on him, walking one foot after another, are the times that I can do the unimaginable and live a life of peace in a storm. And one part that is so helpful to me is being a part of our church family, being encouraged by those around me, taking focus off myself and serving others so that it's not always about me, and worshipping together, which is a time when we realise we are not doing this alone. How is your focus today? What are your eyes fixed on? Are they on your storms? Because more and more I'm realising that focusing on them will not stop them. My prayer for you today is that if you are not part of a church family, that you connect in with one. If you're waiting to hear about the perfect church, then you'll be waiting a long time. If you are rethinking how does church look after a season out on your own, I pray that you will remember the gift of worshipping together, praying for each other, serving others in a place where people can cheer you on as we all keep our eyes off the storm and keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. My prayer for you today